Hey viewer, welcome to my run of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This will be a story mode run, which means we're on easy and there will be no side quests. This is a very heavily story-driven game. In fact, it's basically a playable movie. So as we go through it, I'll be stopping at certain points to talk about what's happening in the story. When I do that, I'll be keeping any viewers in mind who maybe don't have any experience with the original game, or the prequel, Crisis Core, or the sequel movie, Advent Children, or any of the other related materia. Now, before I talk about those story points, I'll be giving spoiler warnings, so anyone who wants to skip them and just figure out what's happening in the story on their own as we go through it can do that. That said, this run will contain spoilers, references, a sardonic sense of humor, taking serious situations lightly, and a reckless disregard for emotional sensitivity. Enjoy. Now, like I just said, I'll be giving spoiler warnings before I talk about the story points. So, spoiler warning. If you want to get to the gameplay, skip ahead to the next episode, because this episode is for anyone who never played the original Final Fantasy VII, or had any exposure to anything Final Fantasy VII. Now, I think the best place to start in understanding the world of Final Fantasy VII is to understand the world. Their world isn't too different from ours, but they have something called the life stream. It really puts the fantasy in Final Fantasy. And what it is a cyclical flow of spiritual energy that courses through the planet. At certain points around the planet, it can concentrate and manifest into pools of liquid deposits called Mako. Mako can crystallize into a substance called materia, and materia can be used to cast spells or just enhance your own innate abilities. Now, about 2,000 years prior to where Final Fantasy VII starts, we have a race of people called the Cetra. They're also known as the Ancients. They had the ability to communicate with the life stream, as well as naturally manipulate Mako into materia. They nomadically roamed the planet in search of the Promised Land, which, according to their belief, was a land of infinite Mako. At some point in their history, something fell from the sky and brought with it a life form that came to be called Jenova. Now, Jenova has two ridiculous abilities. The first is that it can copy and redistribute genetic traits between living beings, essentially making monsters. And the second is an ability that I'm gonna term cellular cyanosis. Basically, what I'm saying with that is that Jenova has an immense amount of psychic ability that can be utilized by each individual cell. We're going to see examples of that as we play through Rebirth, but to give you an idea of the extent of its power, let's say someone was infused with Jenova cells. Those cells can act as an antenna to pull in and concentrate Jenova's consciousness, not only letting Jenova in the head of that person, but in some cases, completely rendering that person Jenova's puppet. They can also be used as catalysts for the copying and redistribution of genetic traits. Now, I'm going to give you a minute to process all that, and register just how ridiculously overpowered that is. Alright, so Jenova is basically a god. It went to war with the Cetra. The Cetra somehow managed to seal it. Fast forward about 2,000 years, and we have an organization called the Shinra Electric Power Company. They started out as a weapons developer until they invented reactors that could generate electrical power utilizing Mako. They continued in weapons development and rose to prominence as a power company. They became a corporocratic military, adopted an expansionist ideology, and started going around to Mako-rich regions of the world, putting up reactors under the guise of bettering those regions, only to drain them of their Mako for profit. It did not work out well for most places they set up shop. Now, Shinra's capital city, Midgar. If you were to look at it from the top down, it's like looking at a pizza. At the center you have Shinra HQ, and around it you have these triangular sectors. On the ground level, you have the sector slums, and about 200 meters above each slum, you have constructed steel plates, the sector plates. The slums are where the majority of Midgar's people live. The sector plates are where Midgar's upper class live. So Midgar is physically constructed to reflect the caste system. As an organization, you have President Shinra at the top, and then under him you have a board of directors. The departments run by those directors are space and aeronautics, public security, urban planning, weapons development, and research and development. They also have their own secret service type organization called the Turks. Now, about 20 to 30 years prior to where Final Fantasy VII starts, we have two members of research and development, Professor Hojo and Professor Gast, along with the last living full-blooded ancient, a woman named Ifalna. They went on an expedition, they unearthed Jenova. Gast and Hojo went back to Shinra. They told him that they found a very well-preserved specimen of an ancient, and Shinra greenlit the Jenova project. Shortly after that, Professor Gast and Ifalna ran off. Professor Hojo went forward with the Jenova project. He infused a fetus with Jenova cells, creating Sephiroth. Sephiroth is a very important character in the Final Fantasy VII story. Later, using Sephiroth's genetics along with Jenova cells and Mako, Hojo created the Shinra Soldier Program, where he makes super soldiers for Shinra's army. With the help of the Turks, Professor Hojo located Professor Gast and Ifalna, as well as their daughter, Aerith. Hojo and the Turks took Ifalna and Aerith back to Shinra, where Hojo held them prisoner and experimented on them for years, until Aerith and Ifalna escaped. A few years after that, we get the start of Crisis Core. Crisis Core is the prequel to the original Final Fantasy VII. It's the story of Zack. Zack is a key character in the Final Fantasy VII story. He's your archetypal good guy. He only wants to be a hero. He joined Shinra's soldier program, worked his way up to soldier first class, and during a battle on the Sector 5 plate, he was knocked from the plate. He fell 200 meters down through the roof of a church, landing in a flower bed, and when he woke up, he was greeted by Aerith. Zack and Aerith formed a relationship, and after that, Zack was in and around Midgar for about a year and a half. Then he got sent on a mission with Sephiroth to a place called Nibelheim. On that mission, Zack befriends another Shinra operative named Cloud. Then something called the Nibelheim incident happens. I'm not going to go into detail about that because we are going to play through it very early on in this game. What I am going to talk about, another major story spoiler. After the Nibelheim incident, Cloud and Zack are captured by Hojo. Hojo experiments on them for the better part of 5 years, until Zack finally escapes with Cloud. Cloud is severely Mako poisoned from Hojo's experiments. He's basically comatose. They are nowhere near Midgar, and Zack tries to make his way back to Midgar with Cloud. They don't make it. A little ways out from Midgar, they're ambushed by a platoon of Shinra soldiers. Zack tries to make a stand against them, but loses. He takes out a very good portion of the platoon, and the last few remaining Shinra grunts end up gunning him down. They don't do anything to Cloud because they think Cloud is already gone due to how Mako poisoned he is. So after they leave, Cloud crawls over to Zack, and in his dying breath, Zack gives Cloud the Buster Sword and asks Cloud to be his living legacy. Then dies. A few weeks to a few months after that, we get the start of the original Final Fantasy VII. We're at Reactor 1 in Midgar. Cloud has been recruited by an anti-Shinra group called Avalanche. They operate in a series of cells, sabotaging Shinra's operations. This particular cell is led by Barrett, and Cloud, Barrett, along with a few other members of this Avalanche cell, are on a mission to bomb Reactor 1. After they bomb the reactor, Cloud gets separated from the rest. In Sector 1, he bumps into Aerith. They have a dialogue. Then Cloud makes his way back to Sector 7. He goes to 7th Heaven, which is a bar where Barrett's Avalanche cell operates out of. He reunites with Barrett, Avalanche, and Tifa. Tifa was a childhood acquaintance of Cloud's, and is also a member of Barrett's Avalanche cell. Barrett, Tifa, and Cloud go on another bombing run to Reactor 5, but things don't go as planned. Cloud winds up falling from the Reactor 5 plate down through the roof of the church that Zack had fallen through, lands in the same flower bed, and also wakes up greeted by Aerith. Aerith insists on helping Cloud back to Sector 7, but they don't make it. They get to Sector 6, and Cloud sees a cart passing with Tifa in the back. Aerith stays by a gate, Cloud jumps on the back of the cart, and Tifa tells Cloud that she's trying to infiltrate a crime boss's mansion to interrogate him because she heard he has information on something Shinra is going to do in Sector 7. Cloud goes back to Aerith, and Aerith insists that they have to save Tifa. So Cloud and Aerith also infiltrate the crime boss's mansion. They save Tifa, and Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith make their way back to Sector 7. When they get there, they find Barret, Avalanche, and some residents of Sector 7 in a firefight with a bunch of Shinra grunts and the Turks. The Turks are there to drop the Sector 7 plate on Sector 7 in an effort to get rid of Avalanche. Tifa asks Aerith to go to 7th Heaven and save Marlene. Marlene is Barrett's daughter. Aerith does this, while Cloud and Tifa make their way up the Sector 7 pillar to join Barret and try to stop the Turks from dropping the plate. They fail. The Turks drop the plate, they kill a lot of people, and in the chaos, they also kidnap Aerith. They bring her back to Shinra. Cloud, Tifa, and Barret survived the plate fall and decide they have to save Aerith. They make their way to Shinra HQ, they infiltrate it, they rescue Aerith, along with another prisoner of Hojo's, Red 13, who Hojo was also experimenting on. And the group escapes Shinra HQ, and via the Midgar Expressway, they escape Midgar. Now, that is the sequence of events for the original Final Fantasy VII, leading up to where Rebirth starts. This game's prequel, Final Fantasy VII Remake, follows the same sequence of events, but changes some significant story points. To understand the significance of those changes, you gotta be really familiar with some key details of the original Final Fantasy VII story. But instead of covering the whole story, I'm just gonna briefly go over it as effectively as I can. The main difference in Final Fantasy VII Remake is the introduction of characters called the Whispers. They are these cloaked specters that appear early on, right in Sector 1, after you bomb Reactor 1, and they hound Aerith and the rest of the group throughout the duration of Remake periodically. Now, to understand why they're doing that, in the second to last chapter of Final Fantasy VII Remake, after rescuing Aerith and Red 13, there's a dialogue between Red and the rest of the party, and he explains that the Whispers are arbiters of fate. That is capital F, like the Greek goddesses. Their sole purpose in existing is to keep events on the course designated by fate. And the reason that they've been hounding Aerith since the start of Remake is because Aerith has knowledge she shouldn't have. Now, to understand that, you gotta know some key details about the cinematics at the beginning and end of the original game. In the opening cinematic of the original game, when the camera pans to Aerith in the Sector 1 alley where she's kneeling in front of a broken Mako pipe, when it goes close up on her, you can see the entire time the camera is panning to her eyes are open. So you play through the game, you beat the game, and one of the ending cinematics is the same close-up of Aerith, but her eyes are closed, and she slowly opens them like she's waking up. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, this game's direct prequel, after the camera pans to Midgar and goes into the Sector 1 alley, we see Aerith kneeling in front of the broken Mako pipe, and when the camera goes close up on her, her eyes are closed. And she slowly opens them like she's awakening. Final Fantasy VII Remake opens with the close-up of Aerith from the end of the original game. It's not a remake of the opening of the original game. Now, like I said, throughout Remake, the Whispers are hounding Aerith. We see them in Sector 1, because when Cloud runs into Aerith, instead of bumping into her and having a dialogue, he sees Aerith at a distance, swatting at the air like she's being attacked by wasps. She grabs onto Cloud's arm, and when she touches him, he can see the Whispers. Now, when Red explains what the Whispers are, Aerith makes the comment to the party that every time they touch her, she loses a piece of herself. You can see at that point she is physically in one piece. What she's talking about is she's losing memories. Specifically, memories of a vision she had of the future. There are a few points in Remake where it's illustrated for us that Aerith knows things she shouldn't, but just to cover the most prominent one, when Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith get to Sector 7 in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Barret and Avalanche are in a firefight with the Turks and the Shinra Grunts, when I explained in the original, Tifa asked Aerith to go save Marlene, and Aerith went to save Marlene. The reason I went into such detail explaining that one sequence is to contrast it with what happened in Remake. Because in Final Fantasy VII Remake, when it comes time for that sequence, Tifa gets as far as just starting her sentence. Aerith cuts her off and goes, "Save Marlene, got it," and then runs off to save Marlene. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, from the time Aerith met Tifa up to that point, Tifa never mentioned Marlene to Aerith. Aerith had no reason to know who Marlene was, let alone where she was. Then after that, it still follows the same sequence of events as the original, but there are some other indications that Aerith has knowledge she shouldn't have. At the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, one of the final boss fights is against the Whisper Harbinger. As we defeat the Whisper Harbinger, remember an Arbiter of Fate, these little orbs of light emanate out of it and pass through the party. As they pass through the party, we get cinematic visions of events that you would recognize from the original Final Fantasy VII story, but these events haven't had the chance to happen in Remake yet. In fact, they don't even get the chance to happen in this game. So basically, the main story change in Final Fantasy VII Remake, while kneeling in front of the broken Mako pipe, Aerith had a vision of her future. The Whispers try to strip her of that vision throughout Final Fantasy VII Remake, and as we defeat the Whisper Harbinger at the end of Remake, we recover bits and pieces of that vision. But there is one other thing too. Remember I said they are arbiters of fate. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, after we beat the final bosses, including the Whisper Harbinger, One of the final cinematics is of Zack. Zack is alive and just outside of Midgar. Remember I said he never made it to Midgar. He died. Somehow beating the Whisper Harbinger, an Arbiter of Fate, changed Zack's fate. And he is now making his way into Midgar with Cloud. And that is where this starts. Let's get into it.